Previously, we added a Navmesh to the scene, and then we added a Navmesh agent, and this Navmesh agent has been driven as an entity, and in this case, it is a dots managed entity. In order to work with this entity and test it, I will want to have viewport interaction for the entity, and we're going to work on that now. However, before I continue, there are some changes which I want to make, and these changes are going to be made to the prefab. The naming for the prefab is not particularly good. I'm going to give this a prefix of NPC instead of GameObject. I'll then give this a temporary name, so this will be proxy. The previous name was being used in multiple places and was becoming a little bit redundant. This will just make what I'm working on a little bit more clear, and I can now start using NPC as a prefix for all NPC prefabs in the future. Next, I want to clean up my hierarchy a little bit. I'll add an empty game object to the hierarchy. I'll rename this to walls, and then I'll add all of the cube objects which I created earlier to this. This will allow me to collapse all of the wall objects, and will make the hierarchy a little bit easier to navigate. I've changed the name of the prefab, so we'll want to make sure that my Navmesh agent is still referencing it correctly. This is being referenced correctly, so I can continue, and in this case I'm going to be updating this script. I want to add the ability to manipulate the script within the viewport so that we can test it more thoroughly, so I'll need to add a couple of things to the script. First, I'm going to add a game object which is going to be used to test our interaction. This will be a public game object, and it will be called editor test. Since this is not going to be part of my actual entities, the variable name will be entirely in capitals so that it stands out. I'll also move this to the start, and I'll separate it from the other variables. After this, I want a variable to store the position for my game object. This will be a public float 3, and it will be called target. I will need to make sure that I'm using the Unity mathematics library. I'll now add the target to the entity as a component, and I'll do this with the add component method. The first argument is going to be for my entity. The second argument will specify my component, and this is going to be a new NPC target component. The NPC target component does not exist, so I'm going to create it at the end of the Baker script. This will be an unmanaged component, so it will be a public struct. It will be called NPC target, and it will inherit from iComponent data. This will need a public value, and this value will be called position. The position will be a float 3 value. This will give me a target value, and we can use this to update our destination. I won't be doing that yet though, as first I want to work on the interaction within the scene, as I want to be able to update this position manually within the viewport. So I want to be able to drive this value from my editor test game object. Because of this, we can initialize the target between curly braces. To do this, I want to isolate the transform from the game object. I'll store this in a variable transform. I'll let the variable be specified automatically using var. I'll then want to get the component from the editor test game object, and I'll do this with a getComponent method. The type of this component will be transform. My Navmesh agent is being passed in through the authoring argument, and I can access my game object from this using .editorTest. I can now update the target, and here we'll be updating the position variable, and this will be set with transform, and we'll extract the position from this with .position. Unity should now read this as a possible editor interaction. This is not guaranteed, but it should work. So I'll return to Unity. I have an error, and that's because I need to assign something for my editor test field. I'll create an empty game object. I'll call this test target. I'll then use this to set the editor test field on my Navmesh agent. When I run this, the error should now disappear. I should now be able to select the test target, and I should be able to move it. This should update the components on the Navmesh agent. I'll set the inspector to runtime. I can make sure that this is locked, and then I can test with my game object. I'll select the target, and I can move it, and the NPC target component on the entity should now update. We must of course be careful where we move this. We do not want to move this too far off the Navmesh, both to the side or vertically. More importantly, this is currently updating. However, this may not work every time, so we can enforce that this will work. I'll update my script to make sure that this does happen. Before my transform, I'll use a depends on method, and the argument for this will be authoring.editorTest. And this should make sure that Unity will always update this correctly. Specifying the dependency here is actually the correct way of doing this, and this is how we should be approaching it. This will give us our updated target value, and we can now use this within our system. We'll do this in a for each loop. We'll specify the type of the variables automatically using var, And I'll have two variables. The first of these will be agent for my Navmesh agent, and the second will be target for my MPC target. And we'll look for these in system API.query. Here I'll look for anything with our Navmesh agent component in it, as well as our MPC target. Within this loop, I can update the agent, and I'm going to update the destination using the setDestination method. We'll call this with agent.navmeshagent.setDestination. We'll set the destination with the target, and specifically we want to get the position from the target. We should now be able to update the Navmesh agent's target within the viewport. I can press play again, and my agent is now moving towards the target. When I move the target, it should change where the Navmesh agent is moving to. We should basically be able to make the Navmesh agent follow the target dynamically. This will allow us to test certain things more easily, as we will not be required to manipulate the player. Setting up things like animation will be far easier to perform this way, as this will allow us to test the animation more directly.